It's absolutely pointless, indeed, to quit to forget what you've already done.
Or am I just daydreaming too much?
It's the series brings in money.
Today we have opened a new vector of development for the company AERONOVA.
You are practically transporting almost 99% of the cargo that exists.
Welcome to New Generation Airships. Yulia Shishkina here. This is a podcast. We explore the structure of the design bureau, and this is a podcast. Today we will finally delve into the structure of the design bureau, AERONOVA, who is the boss of whom, who reports to whom, and what everyone is actually doing. We will also hear one of the opinions on the company's overall development vector. And we will be asking some additional inquiries to the head of the AERONOVA Design Bureau, Boris Ivchenko. Hello?
Good afternoon.
Let's first clarify who you actually are in the Design Bureau, in the context of your role within the organization.
The company has a division, an engineering center, which is a key part of the company, and is led by the experienced Fedor Konstantinov. The engineering center essentially encompasses all the engineering activities of the company. Accounting, legal, and other departments are separate. But the engineering center is the future foundation of the company. It involves the development and production of airships, such as various tests, both laboratory and field. In general, the cycle of creating any object, including an aircraft or an airship, typically involves first thoroughly developing it, issuing comprehensive design documentation, calculating and performing all necessary and thorough calculations, then conduct some laboratory tests of mock-ups and models, finally choose, let's say, the design and everything else, then issue the working drawings, manufacture a prototype based on them, and test it both on the ground and in flight, in the air, and then carefully make necessary adjustments to the design documentation in accordance with the test results, and after that, you can subsequently proceed to certification, you can give the airship life, and it can be successfully operated thoroughly.
And in this particular cycle, firstly, it's fascinating to know approximately how much time it takes and how many people, or rather, not how many people, but what various specialties are involved. Designer. Why are there so many? They surely perform different functions. What are those?
So, about the engineering center. In the engineering center, well, I've already mentioned that we currently have, as it were, concentrated essentially a design bureau. These are essentially the people who calculate, design, and ultimately produce the drawings for the airship. The production part is also concentrated there now. These are the people who will be manufacturing it. And there are also laboratories that partially test individual elements. So currently, this is all part of the engineering center. Over time, what we call a design bureau should be formed there. These are essentially the developers of the airship, those who design it, produce the drawings, make the calculations, and hand it over to production.
Will there be separate production, separate developers?
And separately, a testing or flight testing like flight testing complex. The testers will be separate.
Right now, all of this is in a compressed format.
Yes, there are few of us. And that's correct because, well, firstly, there aren't that many people who understand all of this. And it's difficult to gather everyone at once. And it's not necessary, because if you gather everyone, there are no tasks for them, they won't be engaged yet. Testers, there's nothing to test yet. Manufacturers, there's nothing to produce either. Yes, some individual specialists, certain people, managers should already be appearing because they need to prepare both the test stands and some testing methodologies. The same goes for production. You don't just wake up in the morning and everything is ready. That doesn't happen.
They certainly need to make some adjustments, absolutely, before any money is spent on something tangible or concrete. Yes, indeed.
No, they even need to first understand where to produce and how to produce, on which specific equipment, choose this equipment if it doesn't exist. If it exists, then it needs to be installed somewhere and purchased. Some equipment takes 6 months to be delivered, maybe even longer, especially serious, large machines. So at this stage, we won't be producing everything ourselves, but we'll place orders with those who already have everything. However, we plan to eventually produce many things ourselves. Obviously, we won't be producing everything, we won't be mining ore or casting metal, but we will handle some things related to the airship, especially those connected to the envelope, because this is a specific area of production, and it might be hard to find someone who specializes in it. Therefore, some things we need to develop ourselves and some in cooperation with other enterprises.
Tell us about your work in the Design Bureau. So now we clearly understand that you are the head of the Design Bureau. And how do you determine who is in charge of whom, who is responsible for what, and what is most important? There is Zubkevich, there is Konstantinov, and there is you. There might be other managers that I am not aware of.
Yes, I have been involved in aeronautics for a long time, more than 40 years, and specifically in airship construction. I started by graduating from the Moscow, then still called Bauman Higher Technical School, entered postgraduate studies, defended my thesis, and after that I was invited to work at the Dolgoprudnenskoye Design Bureau of Automation, the so-called DKB. At that time, it was the only one in the Soviet Union involved in aeronautics, and that year they were specifically tasked with working on an airship. It was called DP-1, 2 DPs, and they worked on it for a very long time, but ultimately never built it. The Soviet Union collapsed, and those were the consequences of it. But I joined as a young specialist and worked in the computational research department. Then, after a couple of years, I moved, and in total, I worked there for 7 years. I transferred to the design department, where we specifically designed the airship. I was the head of the computational sector. After leaving the Dolgoprudny Design Bureau of Automation, initially in 1990, which was still before the collapse of the Soviet Union, such an enterprise was created, and young, active people went there. This enterprise was called Dirigible Stroy USSR. It was kind of a revival, as there was an enterprise with that name back in the 1930s. It was established by a decree of the Ministry of Aviation Industry and the Central Committee of the Komsomol. And we, including myself, moved there. There were 10 people, and we had just started to develop. At that moment, the collapse of the Soviet Union occurred, and we kind of shifted to commercial attempts at activity. So during that particular time frame, specifically before the collapse happened, we reached out to France in order to discuss the necessary fabric required for the airship. There was undoubtedly one company, Raysurt, and they certainly extended an offer for all of us to move near Paris, ready to set up enterprises, everything. But somehow back then, it was scary in the early 90s, not many people were moving anywhere, so we declined somehow.
Although life was indeed quite difficult in the 90s.
Well, you know, as you might imagine back then, that challenging and arduous life was just beginning. It was only the harbingers of it at that time indeed. After the 90s, those were such turbulent years for our country.
Was there no time for airships at all then?
Well, you know, no, not at all. As you might expect, I was always involved with airships and aeronautics in various capacities. I didn't leave that field. I worked at aerostatics. The first airships were created, Aerostatic 01, Aerostatic 02, where I was directly involved, being the head of the department and deputy chief designer. These were single-seat airships.
But no funds were allocated, indeed. The state wasn't interested at all.
The state did not allocate funds at that time. But there were private clients. We were featured with Aerostatic 02 in films, like the Chinese service, and flew with advertisements over Moscow. Back then, it was easier to fly over Moscow, getting permission was simpler, and we flew while the airship was stationed at Tushino, which is now built up. But back then it was still an airfield, and it was based there, and we flew to VDNKH and along the Moscow River. Well, specific and particular routes over Moscow were permitted, and we flew, in particular, in the airspace with promotional advertisements for various companies and services, earning money from that. The same principle applies to making appearances in movies and films. However, over time, this particular subject matter in the field of aerostatics gradually diminished and almost disappeared from discussions. Funding became very poor. I was invited to the Avgur Aeronautical Center in 2000, and I actually worked there for 20 years. I was invited as the head of the design bureau, and I was the one who established it at the Avgur Aeronautical Center. Over time, this center undoubtedly became a leading enterprise in aeronautics and airship construction in Russia. About 10 different airships were created. A single-seater, 1, 2-seaters, in fact you could say 4, and how many? Let me count them for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 AU-30 10-seater airships, and many imported balloon complexes, such as those brought in from abroad. It was a government order. That is, in the best years, up to 300 people worked at the Avgur Aeronautics Center, for instance, and we had a closed cycle. We had production, development, we had production, only we had the envelope and general assembly, and we conducted the tests ourselves. So, in general, we were producing products quite successfully.
And where are these airships now?
Well, their resource has already expired, their service life. Some are located in Kerchach, in a hangar. There is 1 or 2, and the rest have all been decommissioned. Well, I don't know. We sold one to France, an airship. This company is Valeris. But even there, it's not quite an airship. We provided the envelope, the tail assembly, the gondola body. That was their own development. I don't know, they operated it for about 6, 7, 8 years, flying around their resorts with advertisements. Well, after that, probably the resource expired, honestly, I don't know.
What resources does an airship have?
Well, you know, it varies. Generally, if you consider everything, like flying the device, it can last 20, 25 years. But that's with the condition of replacing certain parts.
Maintenance, with the condition of proper maintenance.
No, well, technical maintenance is also natural, but also replacements. For example, the envelope needs to be replaced. The envelope probably lasts about 5 years. After that, it should ideally be replaced because it may no longer hold helium gas well over time, as the material's ability to retain helium diminishes, making it economically unfeasible to operate as it loses a lot of gas, leading to increased operational costs. There are other components as well, such as various instruments and equipment, which also have their own service life and resource limits. The engine power unit needs to be overhauled. Well, each has its own unique way, but fundamentally speaking, the gondola is considered separately, as a distinct entity. It's a piece of metal, so to speak, or composite. It has a long service life of 20, 25 years. So, well, as you can see, that's how it is.
And then finally comes the year 2020. In the month of December, when you leave there?
Yes, I leave. And essentially, I worked in several different companies for a while. Well, I was also the chief designer at the enterprise there.
All airships, and perhaps all airships?
Well, airships, aerostatic devices, and various types of others. There are such imported balloons and different kinds of them. We also worked on an imported manned balloon. It was called an aerolift. It rises on a cable to a height of 150 meters. There are such things. A French company is involved, a British company, in many capitals across Europe, and not only in Europe. It lifts to a height of 150 meters, 200. There's a round gondola, a balloon gondola. It lifts up on a cable from a height. People walk around, look over the place, and then it descends. Recently, we planned to develop something like this for Jerusalem, but due to recent events, it has all stalled.
So interesting. The reason I'm asking again, have you ever stopped working specifically on the development of aeronautical devices? It's so fascinating because until Solar Group made headlines with this news that we're taking on a new project for funding and it will be airships, everyone was wide-eyed, like airships? Why? From where? They just seem to fall from the sky, but it turns out there are people among us who have been working on this tirelessly for decades. Airships never really disappeared, or rather, they never left us. They've always been around somewhere.
But these were still more like one-off projects. Mainly what I was involved in were, let's say, government contracts. This field in the country was not exactly developing very actively, but it was still progressing. Because there aren't that many physical principles of, let's say, flying in the atmosphere, right? There's the aerostatic principle, which we're indeed discussing. It uses lift or Archimedes force, which is based on the displaced volume of liquid and/or weight. The weight of the displaced volume of liquid or gas is subjected to the influence of an upward force, a buoyant force called Archimedes force. And if the weight of this volume is less than the weight of the air, then an upward force appears, which is called the aerostatic force. In water, submarines float or people swim. This is Archimedes' force in water. And in the air, there is a similar force. There is aerodynamics. This is how airplanes fly, and there are jet rockets that fly. Well, basically, almost everything. You can have some electromagnetic or other types, but in principle, there are these three types of devices, and if there is a physical principle, a law, then it is incorrect not to use it in any situation. These opportunities are given to us by nature. The other thing is that there are different stages of development for this technology. Sometimes they are forgotten, sometimes they are revived. New materials, new technologies appear.
New challenges?
Yes, new challenges. It becomes economically beneficial. Nevertheless, in many countries, this has been pursued constantly, always, at least in developed ones. That is, this includes the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, Europe, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, America, and now China, where many companies are engaged in this and trying to utilize it.
Interesting. And how did this meeting with Solar Group happen? How did you come to this? Did they find you? Did you find them? Was it a call? Was it a meeting? How did it happen?
It so happened that, in fact, I participated in the first meeting when there were many representatives, when Alexander Nikolaevich Kirillin was still there. It was a presentation. It was in September, right?
The presentation of the new generation airship project.
As you understand, the circle of specialists in this field is quite narrow. He wanted me to become, if everything goes forward, his deputy, specifically to handle the issues of certification calculations. He also invited Zubkevich Vadim, Dmitry Khmel, as well as several other highly skilled and experienced specialists in their respective fields to the event. And since I was invited, I observed firsthand how the process was happening and ultimately decided to participate in this exciting new venture.
And did you actually perhaps leave your previous job?
Yes, I patiently waited for the right moment. And during that time, I was actively telling everyone that in October 2024, I would carefully decide what to do next and was open to considering various offers from different companies. The offer that I received from the well-known and reputable company, Solar Group, turned out to be the most attractive and appealing option, let's say. And at that particular time, all of the others either did not make any offers or simply remained silent.
Or perhaps the offers weren't as attractive.
Let's put it that way.
All right. And now let us come to the second part of the question. Specifically, now your area of influence and competencies. Specifically,
Although we don't currently have a design bureau as such, the responsibility lies in, firstly, gradually creating it, and secondly, managing the specialists we currently have, setting aside the actual chief designer of the Nova 2 airship. That's Vladimir Zubkevich. He is responsible for the technical side, for the visual appearance, and overall functionality, let's say, of the apparatus. He proposes it. He is responsible for ensuring that the apparatus, in general, realizes certain properties and meets, if we had a technical specification. He is responsible for ensuring that the apparatus complies with this technical specification. We have developed something like a technical specification within the enterprise, and this is the path we are following. This is his area of expertise. My competence is to ensure that it is ultimately implemented, specifically implemented. That means I assign tasks to specialists, designers, and analysts, and I accept this work. Not all of it, not everything. Vadim Zubkevich and I have divided areas of influence. So it is organized like this, essentially in a structured manner. There is a technical person who effectively assigns tasks to other people. But these people are officially, functionally subordinate. Let's say, in essence, a hierarchical pyramid framework is built where ultimately Konstantinov is at the top as the leader, and I am below, essentially in a way that is clear. And there's another branch, which is the technical one, where he assigns tasks to calculate something, design, or release drawings for something. And in principle, both he and I potentially check them. So he is responsible for the technical side, and I am more for the organizational part.
And the others, our designers, are more like executors. And they come to you and say, what you've drawn for us here doesn't exist in nature. Indeed, we can't find these materials. This can't be done because of this. We offer you these options. So is this how the communication happens?
Well, why necessarily like that? It can be like that, yes, but usually what happens is they are given a task, they complete it, come back, and report. This is the ideal scenario for a boss. When you give a task, the subordinate catches it mid-sentence and, without asking anything, leaves and brings back the completed task tomorrow, or better yet, yesterday, and reports it. That's ideal, but it doesn't happen. I can list, well, I have here what is essentially planned. We see what a design bureau should consist of to ensure understanding. This is, well, first, the general views department, or the design department. It should enhance and develop the technical appearance in a comprehensive manner, release the most general views, and some diagrams. This is Kamel. Yes, he is an employee of this department. That is, this is a person who is, let's say, well-versed in all matters. But it's not necessary for him to know the details of aerodynamics or anything else. He should, as an analyst, thoroughly gather everything and propose his own comprehensive vision. The chief designer, based on the task of the chief designer or a separate part, for example, the nacelle and fuselage and so on, the empennage. And indeed, these are the kind of specialists we have in our design department. We already have several specialists there. But since there are few of us, we slightly combine departments. I have expanded here. We now also include specialists in the shell, in the design shell, in this department. So the next department is the computational theoretical department. It might later split up. In aviation enterprises, this involves a lot of people. These are people who specialize in calculations of aerostatics, elements of the air-gas system. We have such a department. It involves mass calculations, flight technical characteristics, aerodynamic characteristics, and flight dynamics.
Is there such an employee today?
Who does what? We have several employees, not just one.
In this department?
Yes, of course, we have flight dynamics, loads, strength, thermal calculations. So it's a whole complex. We have, well, first of all, I am a specialist, let's say, in the calculation part, yes. We have people who work on aerostatics, and there are those who handle calculations for air gas system units. Well, we also handle masses, aerodynamics, dynamics, loads, and strength. In general, we have everything, but there are very few of us as a small team. So a person is handling 3 or 4 types of tasks in our operations and responsibilities.
So when the enterprise starts operating on a more global scale, these resources will not be enough. And more skilled people will be recruited so that one person doesn't have to handle such multitasking issues.
He might be the leader of a department, and he will have subordinates who will look into things more thoroughly, such as in the organization. Because when the design manufacturing begins, more structural analysts are needed, as almost every part needs to be assessed for strength, since we have to ensure reliability. This is an aircraft, so, well, more people will be needed there. Next is the shell structure department. They are responsible for developing the major parts. These are the shells, nacelles, various frames, the airship's tail assembly, nose reinforcement, and such elements, meaning they develop all sorts of structural components. We also have a few people who work on this, but for the Nova 2 airship, we plan to delegate most of the work to the specialists at OSK-BESMAI, so to speak. We have collaborated with them for a long time, for many years, through the Auger Aeronautical Center. We know they are highly skilled specialists of a serious level, and we hope they won't let us down.
In general, whoever I talk to from AERONOVA, they are all somehow connected with ESMAI. Either they are defending their doctoral theses or, in principle, they teach at MAI. Fyodor Konstantinov, while giving me a tour, showed that there is some kind of laboratory part of the office, and MAI students will be invited there. In short, there is very close cooperation with MAI.
Well, that's right. We not only have close cooperation with MAI, we also have close cooperation with Bauman, as it is now called, the Moscow State Technical University, MSTU. I graduated from the prestigious and renowned higher technical school, which was called Bauman at that time, in Moscow, Russia. These are probably the best universities in our country, let's say, in the field of aerospace, especially known for its excellence in the world. Therefore, of course, we are interested in attracting students from there to our institution, and we need to nurture them and provide them with opportunities for growth and development in their respective fields. At Avgur, when I started creating the design bureau, we invited about 5 to 6 students from the 4th, 5th year. This initiative aims to foster a new generation of skilled professionals. Then they defended their theses and stayed with us. These people, we've been there for over 40 years. Some of them still collaborate with us, but some have already taken leading positions in the aviation industry, and it's already difficult to lure them back, so to speak. So we need to start afresh and with renewed energy in order to try to begin with students again.
Cool. Well, it seems to me it's a bit like, yes, it takes us back to the Soviet years when you were studying. You already knew, even during your studies, where you would go to work. You didn't leave the institute with a frightened face, wondering what to do next. Who needs me? I think this is indeed very great for students.
And you know, the most interesting thing is that in technical universities, if you go now and ask a teacher, like in the same MI, do you have any capable students? He will say yes, but they are all taken. Starting from the 4th year, they are all already placed somewhere. So those who want to, the capable ones, and those who want to connect their future life, well, their professional activity specifically with aviation, almost all of them are already placed.
Oh, interesting. How does that happen? Who knows about their successes? At what stage are they generally offered something?
The teachers, there are teachers who lecture and work somewhere. Or to the teachers, like I approach them, do you have any? And others approach them and ask, or during internships. People go through them and they are invited there. So in principle, they say that, well, it's not like that. You need to start from the first or second year now. Well, at the latest from the third and beyond that, or you can entice them away. Well, that's also possible, but...
That's how it turns out.
Yes. So let's say both at May and Baumann and in leading universities, people are already working part-time, students.
And moreover, it's such an engaging and demanding profession that if you've already started in this field, you'll always be busy and in demand.
Well, probably, yes, there was a period when designers were not in demand, but now they've started again. Well, for probably 10 to 5 years, there are few of them, and people are in demand, and decent salaries are paid, so...
Just an important note for our young viewers.
Yes, it's not so bad here. If we go further, well, actually, I'll quickly go over it. This is, as you can see, the onboard equipment department. Indeed, this is all the equipment that is on board. In fact, the control systems department develops. The power supply systems department and ground equipment, because airships have special ground equipment. These can be masts, some other devices, and ultimately even a hangar, if needed. So that's the composition. And there's also a very important department, by the way, for technical documentation and certification, because any product, absolutely any, must be accompanied by an operating manual, like an airship, as well as any aircraft. This is a detailed flight operation manual, if it is piloted, for operation. The work regulations, meaning how to work with it, and it's very important to write it in a way that people understand how to maintain it.
In our specific topic, it is quite challenging to comprehend at this moment who exactly has the control over all these matters and which particular agency is supposed to set the appropriate rules and guidelines for us. Occasionally, these entities are referred to as the aviation authorities of the country. And who will be responsible for this?
Rosaviatsia. There is a state body called Rosaviatsia. Previously, it was the IACE, the Interstate Aviation Committee. Now Rosaviatsia oversees everything. It's all documented. There are laws corresponding to the certificates, all set.
People often ask how the routes of airships will be carefully coordinated and managed in various ways, these kinds of aspects.
As you can see, that's a little bit different. It's entirely... Airships are considered aircraft. In fact, there is a law, specifically a law about airspace and its use. As you might know, you can take it, open it, and read it.
So there won't be any difference whether you're a helicopter, an airplane, or an airship. You strictly follow this law.
Yes. Well, you also have to undergo a thorough certification process. Do you fully understand what certification truly is? It is essentially about obtaining an official document that confirms you are indeed safe. Safe for those around you, and equally safe for those on board. There are certainly different levels of safety. There's a specific individual certification where you are not allowed to transport passengers for money, only to perform aviation work. Well, here the requirements are simpler. It's assumed that if a person is at work, they, kind of understand what they're getting into. So to speak, yes, and it's simpler there. But if you sell tickets and transport passengers, then it's a completely different matter. And here you need to obtain a type certificate, a standard one, which is more stringent. This exists in the Russian Federation. It was adopted. I participated in this as well in 1996. Such a set of laws was adopted. It is very similar to the American one, and the same in Europe, and I believe in China as well, because everyone tries to make them close to each other. And everyone agrees to this and grants permission to use theirs, because it's easier to sell. If, for example, one country has one requirement for the power supply unit and another country has a different one, then it turns out you have to, sort of go through validation before selling it. Yes, that's the word. Adapt to foreign requirements. Well, yes, prove that it meets foreign standards. And if they are similar, validation still takes place, but it is more relaxed, requiring less money and time. Therefore, in general, we have standards, but these are typically standards that are accepted here for airships, as a rule. For example, the Nova 2 fits with a number of passenger seats not exceeding 9.
No more than up to 9 passengers can be taken, not counting the pilots.
Not counting, so this is in general what we refer to as the so-called normal classification category. In principle and practice, standards were meticulously developed by Europeans, Germans in particular, and also notably by Dutch authorities for aircraft accommodating up to 19 passengers. These are commonly known as local airlines or community carriers when translated into English. And there were the so-called transport airships. The standards for transport airships, such as these, are indeed where there are no upper limits, and the requirements are indeed stricter. This is a comprehensive set of rules. Well, I don't know. There might be numerous requirements that the device must potentially meet.
In principle, we are indeed talking about our first airship, which we plan to launch into the sky in 2025-2026. We do not intend to transport passengers there.
Well, how to say? We plan to launch it, but not in a certified manner, of course. We plan to launch the device within the project called AERONOVA, piloted with an experienced pilot at that particular time, and that's it. Furthermore, since we say that this device is, in fact, currently indeed still a technology demonstrator for us, we want to work out various landing technologies on it, including control systems, automatic control systems, and landing technologies, so that there are fewer or maybe no people on the ground at all. Well, it's unlikely to work out completely, but there should be fewer operating personnel on the ground. Well, it's about money, it's economics. The more service personnel you have, the more expensive it becomes.
Could there be such a multifunctional staff in this regard, where today someone is indeed a pilot and tomorrow they are on the ground? Are these all different people?
These are different people. Well, the ground crew is the ground crew. A pilot can't just jump out of the cockpit, run to do something, and then jump back in. No, pilots are separate.
There are technicians, dispatchers. How many people should there be in total?
On the staff? No, actually, dispatchers are separate.
Isn't that our staff standing right over there?
Not ours. Yes, not our staff. Our staff are indeed those on board, the pilots and those who specifically receive the aircraft, help passengers disembark, dock it to something, maybe bring it into the hangar. In fact, they are truly the ones responsible for these tasks. And the support, what you're talking about, flight support. It's like now you can submit an application to ATC, not for internal affairs, but for air traffic control. Yes, and they will grant you permission. So, do you perhaps have a specific route? Or maybe do you have a regular route, like a plane flying from Moscow to St. Petersburg, with a fixed time and a permanent permit, for instance? They are all laid out in advance. If someone is flying to a different place, they submit their application for flight permission for approval. They might not be given the permission, but for certain reasons, like, for example, a restricted area due to military or something else, but usually they allow it. But for this, the aircraft must have registration numbers. It must be registered like a car. It has numbers, and without numbers, it can only go to the traffic police or somewhere else, but it cannot constantly drive around the city. The same goes for any aircraft. It must have registration numbers or identification, the appropriate documents, let's call it a technical passport, which allow it to be in the air, proving that it is safe. Safe. And in order to obtain this document, one must undergo certification of various, as I say, options.
And when all these procedures are completed, we call the air traffic control, not the Internal Affairs Department, and say, we want to fly to Moscow. I don't know where you want to go, but there is a certain procedure. And they say, request accepted, and then you usually receive your route back, and you can precisely fly according to it on specific days at specific times. Many stages.
But no, this is done in a notification manner and order, and in principle, it is not a problem if everything is in order. If you have the equipment, you represent an organization that can fly, because you need to be some kind of company that has the right to operate airships. This process is typically carried out in a notification manner and order, ensuring that all necessary protocols and procedures are followed. In principle, there should not be any issues as long as everything is in order and all requirements are met, and the airship itself is in excellent and confirmed technical condition. Yes, indeed, it has some official documents stating clearly that it has airworthiness, let's say, quite normal. Then please, it's possible. The main thing, firstly, is to have the device, and secondly, for this device to meet the requirements outlined in these so-called airworthiness standards, which are well known. And you need to know them thoroughly, carefully study and analyze them in detail, and build the device while adhering strictly to these specific requirements. Well, I can give a simple example just to make it clear for everyone involved. For instance, there is a requirement stating explicitly that there must be a fireproof wall between the engine compartment and also between passenger cabin. You can sort of verify and confirm that you have it, but you must physically present and show it to the inspector. You need to either show drawings that it exists to the inspector, but to demonstrate and prove that it is fireproof, what do you need for that? Or you make it, for example, from aluminum, but of a certain thickness, though I don't remember the exact thickness, or from steel of a certain thickness, but less. Well, steel, for example, let's say 1 millimeter thick, but I'm saying right away that this is not the case. But from aluminum alloys like duralumin, for example, 1.5 millimeters or 2, and that's sufficient. That is, if you have at least this thickness, it's sufficient. Or you simply incorporate it into the design and don't think about it, because someone has already thought about it for you and said that this is suitable. It's passed all the tests. Or then you know nothing, you do it as you know, and then, as you might expect, they tell you, test it, wait for this, prove this and that. In the end, firstly, it will be, much more expensive, and, secondly, it is not even certain, that it will hold up if you haven't tested it.
Therefore, now perhaps I will introduce a slightly new question here, which is related to advancements in technology and its impact on modern transportation. So the new generation of airships, designed with cutting-edge technology and improved safety features, does not imply any direct experiments or some innovative ideas. This is because let's not make an airship in the shape of a pill out of, perhaps gold or something like that, meaning there won't be any significant deviations from the norms that work.
Now they will say, no, we will indeed experiment. Yes, we will experiment. And in principle, the norms include the possibility of experimentation. This doesn't mean that we have to move
radically against.
No, not at all. It's not like a step to the left, a step to the right, execution. No, that's not the case. Please, you can. But you just need to choose and understand why you're doing it, and whether it's worth spending the effort and resources on it. And most importantly, there's also the economic feasibility by evaluating various factors.
All right, we've come right to this question. Tell us about a potentially successful airship, commercially and otherwise, in your opinion.
One must move slowly and cautiously towards such an airship. There have been experiments in the innovative field of airship development and innovation with the German company Cargo Lifter. And at the present time, to be completely honest, there is a company actively working on flying whales. That's something like air whales. Yes, a French company, which immediately and confidently stated that they would make large and substantial cargo airships. One can get involved in such a significant and impactful big project, but personally, I really think, in my opinion, especially for our group, for SOLARGROUP, and particularly for AERONOVA, it is very important that we constantly demonstrate our progress, that we keep moving forward, that we don't become isolated and produce nothing for 10 years. And then people will lose faith, trust, and confidence in the system.
It's like the principle of the bird in the hand versus the crane in the sky. Let's take small steps, and we will always demonstrate and, so to speak, test them. We will have something tangible. Maybe we won't stay silent for 10 years, and then suddenly, hooray! We've launched a huge airship. We'll start with small steps, but everything will be actively functioning.
That's the first point. Secondly, people will gain experience, learn how to do more, and, well, cooperation will be established, which is also very important because, for example, an airship that carries 100 passengers is almost the same as a plane that also carries 100 passengers, right? The level is about the same, and the companies that create such planes are enormous. They didn't just appear yesterday, so you have to approach this in the same way because, in general, trying to gather everyone at once, and people are not specialists. Someone might be a brilliant designer but not understand aeronautics. They need some time to learn this, as you know. That's why you need to proceed step by step, in my opinion.
Well, of course, if you stay silent for 10 years and show nothing, all the investors will run away from you because you're not delivering any results.
The first one is currently being built as a manned version, essentially with a pilot, without anything else, let's say, and then it will proceed. We plan to develop in two directions. The first is, in essence, the passenger version. We want it to be a comfortable and spacious six-seater. And besides that, we plan to use it as a reliable and efficient base for an unmanned version designed specifically for cargo transport. But again, it's clear this is 500 kilograms, over 500 kilometers, as we call it. Yes, a range of 500 kilometers, 500 kilograms of cargo. That's what we're aiming for. But this is not, it can be commercially successful, you can make money on it, but again, these are all technology demonstrators, both the technology, passenger, and cargo transport.
We will still strive for larger volumes, larger scales.
And the next stage of our project, which we think will be highly beneficial and advantageous for us, is about 8,000 cubic meters in volume, which is equivalent to the size of a small building. This is already quite a large and significant device in terms of its capacity and potential impact.
What is it for?
It's a sightseeing airship. For example, they ride for approximately 2 to 3 hours. Somewhere, such as in various locations, they land new passengers. So it's like that. We want to test a unique and innovative combined so-called power plant on it. In other words, to switch to electricity, so to speak, so that it is quiet, causes little pollution, and is environmentally friendly. Where to get the energy from? Well, most likely from an internal combustion engine, although we have some new developments, some interesting ones for this setup. So we definitely want, well, there are many recreational parks where you can't fly, let's say, pollute the air. And this, well, in general, it's a trend now, transitioning to electric propulsion. This is the next stage. Well, the next piece of equipment is a transport device, which could be a cruise airship with a volume of approximately 30,000 cubic meters. That's about, well, carrying 10 tons of cargo or so. But this is the development of a rigid scheme. And this is also not the goal.
We'll reach goal.
Let us begin. Here we go. The next stage is crucial. Our ultimate goal is clear. We aim to transport cargo with a capacity of 60 tons. That is indeed the goal. Why exactly 60 tons? I will explain in detail. Because all cargo transportation, both in our country and worldwide, typically breaks down into 60-ton loads. 60 tons is the load capacity of a wagon, which is a critical specification for transportation systems. All bridges, tunnels, railways, infrastructure, and roads are meticulously designed and constructed to accommodate this. So, if you transport 60 tons, you are practically transporting everything. And you can replace anything, any transport, but we do not want to replace any transport. And in principle, we are not going to. We want other transport to deliver somewhere, and for us to deliver where it's no longer possible, where a helicopter can't reach, as a helicopter can carry a maximum of 20 tons, and for such a large plane, it's a big plane, infrastructure is needed at the north, in the remote Far East regions, where it's impossible to build it, not economically feasible, meaning we can actually the airship will be very successful if it becomes an element of infrastructure, you see, not just to deliver something, but like a road, like a bridge, like a railway, like a highway. So the airship is like an aerial road. And then hundreds, maybe even thousands, will be needed, and then it will definitely be an industry, and no cataclysms will be a threat to the enterprise. Yes, probably not to any enterprise.
So, as you know, we have received a new opinion, because everyone who has previously been a guest on my podcast most likely all said that they see the future of the company AERONOVA, specifically in the direction of some kind of entertainment and excursions, in their opinion. That is, people will spend money to see how exciting and thrilling it can be to ride on an airship, experiencing the unique sensation of floating through the sky, to see some breathtaking and panoramic views of the landscape below. We now have a new opinion that it is much more attractive from a business perspective to transport large and heavy cargo to remote and otherwise inaccessible locations.
Inaccessible areas or regions where it is difficult, for example, to deliver essential goods and services efficiently, or they might be excessively bulky, yes, making transportation a significant challenge. There are numerous factors to consider in such situations.
Indivisible cargo, as I understand it.
Well, yes, indeed. But occasionally, people actually say, let's move 200 tons at once. There are indivisible cargoes, but these are some reactors. These are turbines that are very difficult to create and configure. It turns out you can indeed divide it, deliver this cargo, but then at the place where it is unloaded, you need to create a whole entire factory, or at least a workshop, to assemble and configure it. And of course, as you might expect, everyone says there is such an inevitable thing at the manufacturer, deliver it. But maybe we will get to that, but it is a very distant goal. And the most important thing is that for the delivery of such cargo, the price no longer matters, because they themselves are so expensive, and their value is so high that they are ready to pay almost any amount. Well, of course, within reasonable limits, but the question is different, that there are very few such cargoes in the world, and how many such devices are needed there? Well, 5, 6, I think. And this industry, yes, it is indeed important, but in the grand scheme of things, this field, undoubtedly, but it is still, sort of like if such an airship appeared tomorrow, it would certainly be successful. It would find funding for its operation, for its maintenance, and it would bring in a very large profit, even flying infrequently when needed. But the construction of such a device, firstly, requires a significant and substantial amount of money, and secondly, when will there be a return on its construction? Well, I think it's unlikely. But what I'm indeed talking about, 60 tons, it's like, this is indeed mass cargo lifting. You are transporting practically 99% of the goods that exist. You deliver, and then it's something completely different. A different quality. And tourism, yes, it can be profitable, and it will be profitable, but it very much depends on where it is. But they don't have such swift and rapid development, especially and consistent, specifically in the tourism industry. probably because they are in high demand, and steady they are in demand in Germany. But 2 of them fly, 2 airships, and that's it in the current market. Somewhere else, like in China, they have now built, they say they have a 9-seater built within this framework and have supposedly received a certificate, certified it. They supposedly have more than 100 pre-orders for this device. Well, I don't know, we'll see for what purpose. China is a huge country with many people.
Well, in general, cargo will need to be transported as long as the planet exists, but in essence, a person will go on a tour just once in their lifetime, and that's it. They won't need it anymore. It won't interest them anymore. They'll look from the airship, see the view from above, float around, and ultimately, basically, the gestalt will be closed. The dream is fulfilled, but transporting cargo will always be necessary.
And there's no getting away from it. And most importantly, well, what kind of cargo, right? That's important. Probably even a 10-tonner will definitely find its niche of application. And maybe, since the airship itself is large, it can also transport oversized cargo that can't fit into anything else.
And is it indeed possible, or am I just dreaming too much? Can one single company, for example, AERONOVA, perhaps create both small airships, excursion ones, and cargo ones of 10 tons, 60 tons, or am I maybe dreaming 100 years ahead?
No? Well, why not? It can and it should. Of course it's real, and we are moving towards it. But we are saying that we are heading for the big things through the small ones.
But we won't forget about the small ones, right? No, not. It will continue to work and function for us. Bring in money while we move forward.
It is pointless to give up, to forget what you have already done. You invested money, let's say. You discovered a gold mine, and then you took it, turned away, and left. Let someone else come.
Well, yes, I know. The staff, it's still definitely in some way limited. Yes. We release some small airship, understood how it all works, we go to the next step, and we sell this airship to someone and go further. Or will there be sufficient resources that come with expansion to maintain what we've already achieved, work on necessary new things, and launch new projects?
You know, I think that, in my opinion, first of all, in the first place, there should be enough. And secondly, in the second place, it's the designers and engineers who are working on the new stuff. And the engineers, yes, these are the designers and developers, let's say, of new technology. They spend less time on what has already been done. But when they are currently developing something new, the production will be, well, it's not occupied with anything. Let it indeed produce what has already been developed. In the end, it's developed. There are also different testers. There are factory testers who will conduct the tests. So this is already being passed on to, let's say, serial production. And that's right. It should generate a significant amount of money and provide additional details about how new developments. This is basically, well, you see, that's how everyone lives.
Yes, so growth and progress will indeed be what interests us.
It should be that way, yes. And it should bring profit to the company. So it's essential not just to get to serial production as soon as possible, but to actually reach some level of it. It's the series that brings in the money, not the development. Development is mostly expenses. But once you have the first unit, when you start duplicating, you've already spent all your resources. And this can be sold to other interested parties. This does not mean that AERONOVA should exploit every single opportunity. New and innovative transport companies will be created in our country, and anywhere, please. Yes, designers might be needed for things like how a ship rarely looks exactly like another. But it has a series. The foundation is the same. And we want something like a red top, blue bottom, sure, or the other way around. Well, there are also small nuances, right?
Okay, we dreamed.
But I truly hope and sincerely believe, and I wholeheartedly wish, as I usually say at the end of the podcast, I wish that the team will fulfill everything that they have planned, that everything will only favor it. And thank you very much indeed for being so open with me today and not being afraid to truly express an alternative point of view. Sincerely. I think there will be a lot of comments under this episode because before this, we were all about tourist airships. Today, we've opened a new direction for the development of the AERONOVA company.
Thank you for this opportunity. Happy New Year to you and our listeners. I have the usual human wishes for people. May they be healthy, happy, and have plenty of luck. And we will create airships.
In general, you are always worried about your happiness, and we will build the airships. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you for coming to visit us. See you soon.